Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where we elaborate and answer the questions that are posted to all kinds of different places on the interwebs. And this week, we have a change. Things are changing here at Pro Tools Answers. And with me, as always, is Anders Motz from Tone Craftwork. How you doing, Anders?
Doing good. How are you, Andy?
I'm doing well. It's super, super hot over here in Tokyo. It's unbelievably sweaty over here. Or maybe I'm just unbelievably sweaty. You look like you're in a comfortably cool place.
Yeah, it's really cool here. I'm visiting family in Sweden, and it's really cold. I've been freezing for a week.
Nice. I'm jealous.
Yeah, contrast there.
And we have a new face. And so we have a new person that is joining the Pro Tools Answers team. We'll introduce you in just a second. But first, we want to say thank you and best wishes to Dave. And Dave started this endeavor. And over the pandemic, it was great. But he's gotten so busy with performing and working on projects that something had to give. And so he's moving on to bigger and better things. And we thank him for his friendship, his comradeship, and we wish him absolutely all the best. So Dave is hopefully going to visit us from time to time, but he's not going to be a normal, regular member of Pro Tools Answers going forward. Who is, you might wonder? Well, let me introduce you to Mr. Alex Brook. A friend of both of ours, Anders, I think we can safely say.
Yeah.
Hey there, Alex. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going? I'm good. Hello, Andy and Anders, and hello out there, everyone in the internet web world. How's it going?
Are you expecting an answer from the internet?
I'm waiting.
I've got all day. So, Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, both of you gentlemen are dear friends of mine. And on the Pro Tools side of things, you are also both my mentors because I myself am an aspiring Pro Tools user. I would say I'm more on the composing and performing side of things, but just through all my musical activities, I've been using Pro Tools for the last maybe 5 or 6 years. And I've mostly been annoying Andy on pretty much a daily basis with inane questions about Pro Tools, and he has the patience to actually answer them, which is nice. And I'm also located in Tokyo, same as Andy. So every now and then we'll hang out and see the sights of Tokyo with sometimes an adult beverage every now and then.
And I wish to join that.
Sake's on us. Sake's on us. Absolutely.
Alex also, in the interest of full disclosure, has one other thing that's similar with me. I work for a company called Avid Technology that makes Pro Tools. I'm their audio curriculum architect. And Alex works for, who do you work for, Alex?
It's a small company you may have heard. It's called Avid Technology.
And what do you do over there?
And basically, I'm working on the Avid Learning Partner Program. So basically, I'm helping to manage schools who are Avid Learning Partners and making sure everything runs smoothly, which has been a crazy busy, but also like really rewarding position. So it's been great.
Because people have Pro Tools questions and they ask them, and
people they do,
and you give them, dare I say, Pro Tools answers.
I certainly do, but not to the level that you guys can. So I'm often put in a situation where someone will ask me, a question such as, if I take Pro Tools Carbon and turn it on its side, pour water in it, can I use it as a kettle? And so that's a question that I can't answer. And so I'll take that question to Anders and Andy. They'll be able to answer it. And then I'll answer the customer pretending as if I actually knew the answer, making me look a lot cooler than I deserve to be.
Alex, I think you're a very modest guy. I know that you know pretty much about Pro Tools and the hardware as well.
It's been a good journey. And the good thing about Pro Tools is it's a deep topic. When you think you've mastered it, actually, oh, there's a whole nother horizon of information to learn. So I've been really enjoying the process as well. You know, just and also just learning how to get Pro Tools to do what I want it to do when I'm like recording, mixing, editing, bouncing, and also trying to work out, you know, why Pro Tools has this strange behavior. And it's usually because I don't understand the underlying concepts, you know, that make the software operate. So, like I said, I pass this knowledge off to other people, pretending that I know it, and I obviously don't. So I shall.
He's honest, at least, right?
So I will bow to your knowledge.
So speaking of questions and answers, what is this week's question, Alex?
Certainly. So we have been scouring the interconnected tubes that are also known as the internet or interweb. And on the Avid Pro Tools user Facebook group, the question we got was from Christopher, who says, I do mostly vocal recording and mixing. Should I record in 24-bit or 32-bit? And do I bounce at the same bit depth as I recorded? That's a very interesting question. And that also generates a lot of new questions in my head. Firstly, what exactly is 32-bit and how does it differ from 24-bit?
Oh, that's a great question. Fantastic. Anders, you want to take that one on?
Yeah. So when we're talking about bit depth, we're really talking about how many zeros and ones, how many bits Pro Tools uses to store the amplitude of a sound. So basically in 24-bit audio, we've got 24 zeros and ones. And in 32-bit floating point, we basically add another 8 bits to this number. And it uses clever math, and it can describe a lot bigger numbers. And basically, you're getting a lot more headroom in that file.
I think one of the ways that you can understand floating point math the best is to compare it to fixed point math. The 2-bit depths that we have historically used are 16-bit and 24-bit. Mm-hmm. Now, 24-bit, if you have 24 zeros, dead silence. If you have 24 ones, it's the loudest sound you can have. Same thing with 16-bit. If it's 16 zeros, nothing. 16 ones, it's the biggest number that can be stored. There is no bigger number. Now, as Anders says, and he's right, what we're storing in each one of these samples is amplitude data. So the different bit depths between 16-bit and 24-bit really relates to our dynamic range. You know, how loud and how soft can we get? And the dynamic range works out to be 6 dB per bit. 16-bit audio gives us a dynamic range of 96 dB. 24-bit, 24 times 6, gives us a dynamic range of roughly 144 dB. Now, just to put this into context, what is the dynamic range of tape recording, generally speaking?
I'm guesstimating it's about 80 dB.
That's a really good day. I've been in studios 60 to 80, which is great. That's fine. That's a lot. That's a big portion of the dynamic range that we can hear, but it's not all of it. So even 16 dB is dynamically an improvement on what we had in the analog tape days. What is the dynamic range of human hearing?
Roughly 120, something like that.
Right. So 120 dB is generally what we call the threshold of pain. 0 dB is the threshold of hearing. 120 dB is the threshold of pain. 16-bit, it doesn't get to all of the dynamic range that we can hear. 144 dB gives us more dynamic range than we as humans can tolerate without pain, which is why recording at 24-bit has become so popular, because it can capture all the dynamic range that we could possibly need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally
Makes sense, yeah.
Now, then Anders added this part called an exponent. That's where fixed point math starts to change into floating point math. So, like I said, 16-bit, 24-bit, that's fixed point math. The largest number you can possibly get is all ones. That gives you a hard ceiling on your dynamic range. Floating point math gives you a little bit of a mathematical trick. What it has, in addition to the 24 bits of normal audio, which we call the mantissa, we have what's called an exponent. An exponent basically has the ability to shift that dynamic range up when it's needed. The headroom of 32-bit floating point is so huge that it gives us, and I had to write it down, a headroom of 1,528 decibels.
Ridiculously large.
And that's what the floating point architecture gives us, is the ability to, whenever a signal gets too loud, no problem, it just shifts to accommodate that recording. So 32-bit is technically resistant to clipping.
Yeah.
The nature of 32-bit audio resists clipping. There's all sorts of clipping situations that you can easily and completely get out of when you're using 32-bit floating point. Anders, disagree with me.
No, I totally agree with you. And just to make this even more obvious then, the mixer in Pro Tools is always a floating point mixer. It's a 64-bit floating point mixer, and it basically treats every audio file, regardless of what you've made your setting to have it be. It treats every audio file in your session as 32-bit floating point anyway. But what we're talking about right now is how you record it in the first place. So does it matter? And does it matter to record in 32-bit float, or should we all stay in 24?
Well, that's my question too, because 32-bit floating point sounds fantastic. Great. All of my sessions from now on, I'm just going to leave it at 32 because it's better, right?
It can be, if you have the right hardware behind you. And most of us don't, right? So so if you have, most audio interfaces have at maximum 24-bit converters. Now, when you record, and I'm putting this in quotes, when you record at 32-bit, all it does is convert the audio at 24 bits, and it adds an empty exponent.
Yeah, because if what your interface is outputting is only 24-bit and you still record in 32-bit float, it needs to just add zeros in place where there is no information. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Now, there are a few exceptions to this rule. One of them is the Avid Carbon. Avid Carbon is actually a 32-bit converter. And what that means is it brings that whole advantage to recording. If a signal goes too high and it clips, no problem. You can get that original audio right back. It's a get out of jail free card when it comes to input levels. There's a couple others. It used to be that was the only true 32-bit converter. There's a couple other, the Zoom UAC 232, and that's a field recorder. That makes a lot of sense to me because field recorders are in situations where you can get unexpectedly hot levels. Anders, you had another one, didn't you? That is true 32-bit.
Yeah. I've got the Sound Devices Mix Pre 10 that I've had for a couple of years, and it's a 32-bit floating point recorder as well. But I'm not sure if it's actually outputting that through the USB cable when I attach it to the computer. But I know that as a field recorder, it records in true 32-bit float, and you can recover clips and things like that. Yeah.
And what does that recovery look like? Anders, let's imagine you're recording on your field recorder.
Yeah.
And you're recording a soft sound.
Yeah.
And you set your levels for that soft sound. And then all of a sudden, a marching band goes by you. And it looks like it's clipping.
Yeah. So I can then import that sound into Pro Tools, and I can just clip gain down that part, and it will still have all of the information above those levels. And I can simply recover that clip. So it doesn't give me a straight line, but actually retains all of the little nuances of the actual recording.
Because there's exponent data in the file that field recorder is creating, right?
Yeah.
And most interfaces are not that way. If I record with the interface that I've got here in my studio, it'll create a 32-bit file. But if I'm clipping, I'll use clip gain, I'll bring it down, and it's still flat. It will still sound clippy. It'll just be less loud. So if you are unsure about whether or not your interface is a true 32-bit converter, record clipping at 32-bit. Then use clip gain to bring it down. If it's flat, if it's still hitting a ceiling, then it's a 24-bit converter, which is not a problem in a studio situation. For field recorders, I think it's far more valuable than for audio interfaces. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Well, let me ask another question. So then, why would I ever record in 24-bit if I had a 32-bit recording device. I could just set it to 32-bit and just leave it like that.
I would, right? So if you have a true 32-bit recording device, use it. Use it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? It will eat up a little bit more space on your hard drive. It will eat up a little bit more processing power. Because when you have plugins and stuff like that, it's going to take more processing power, 50% more than 24-bit. But you will get some advantage from it, and if you've got a powerful system, have at it, Haas, go. But if you don't have a true 32-bit converter, don't bother. Don't waste your space. Right? Record at 24-bit, and I think. So you're recording at 24-bit, you're recording at fixed point math. Whether or not you're recording at 32-bit floating point, you still have floating point magic happening inside Pro Tools Mixer. And Anders, how does that work?
You'll get all of the advantages as soon as you're inside of the mixer. So if you're starting adding like compressors and EQs and stuff like that, that could make the signal be louder than what you expected. It will not clip. Even if you don't have a 32-bit floating point interface, there are still advantages sometimes to set your system to be 32-bit float. And that has to do with rendering files in Pro Tools. If you're working with Elastic Audio, for instance, and you're using rendered files in Elastic Audio, and you've got 32-bit float engaged, you're less likely to clip something. So there are like slight advantages of using 32-bit floating point, even if your interface doesn't support it. And there are other occasions as well.
You're 100% right, 0% wrong. And the way that I do it is when I'm recording, I record at 24-bit. I set my session to be 24-bit. It will create 24-bit fixed point files on my tracks. And that works out fine for me. It gives me an efficient use of space, of resources, all that stuff. Unless I had a true 32-bit interface, in which case I would record at 32-bit. But if it's a 24-bit converter, then recording at 32-bit just gives me, 8 zeros that I could never use. Does that make sense?
You're just wasting space, right?
You're just wasting space. There's no possible sonic advantage to that, right?
Yeah.
But once I'm done recording, or if I know I'm going to do any kind of rendering, you can always go up into your session setup window and change your bit depth. So if I change my bit depth from 24 to 32 and I consolidate, for example, guess what that creates? A 32-bit floating point file, which can give you the advantages of having an exponent. So what Anders was saying, rendering, bouncing, anything internal, there are potential advantages to changing your session over to being 32-bit. And could you change it back to 24-bit? Absolutely. You can change your bit depth anytime you want to. It doesn't change the way the mix engine works. It just changes what kind of files you're going to create.
Yeah, so just to be clear here, when Andy changes the bit depth of an existing session, it doesn't resave those audio files as 32-bit floating point. Everything that you recorded up to that point will still remain 24-bit. But anytime you render or record something from that point on, it will be a 32-bit floating point file. You could even have 16-bit files in there and 24 bits and 32-bit floating point files coexist in the same session.
Absolutely you can. And as Anders said, inside of a single track, from one insert to another, that path is 32-bit floating point. So even if you didn't record a 32-bit floating point, you get all the advantages of a floating point channel, which didn't always used to be the case. Even with the old, very expensive mixed core systems, they had fixed point math between the interfaces, and you could clip and not be able to recover. Now it's virtually impossible. And then each of the tracks dumps into a mix engine, which is what, Anders?
64-bit floating point. And that's ridiculous.
That means that you can have lots and lots of loud tracks. Your master fader can be clipping. All you have to do is bring that master fader down, and you're done. And you've recovered all of that with none of the sonic bad stuff that people normally associate with moving a master fader. Moving a master fader in a digital audio workstation is not the same as moving a master fader on an analog console. Your question was, what's the advantage to recording at 32-bit floating point? The answer is none, unless you have a 32-bit converter. right?
Yeah,
and you could test it yourself by just recording. And if it's clipping, you record something that's clipping, you bring it into a track, put clip gain on it. If it's still clipping, if it's still flat, you've got a 24-bit recorder, which is most interfaces out there, right? So there you go.
Going back to the original question, I think it wasn't quite clear if Christopher's actually has a 32-bit recording audio interface or not. And if he doesn't, then no, he shouldn't record in 32-bit. He should record in 24-bit. And then potentially he can change the session to be 32-bit float, and he has all the advantages that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Right.
And I want to be clear: is somebody doing something wrong by recording at 32-bit floating point? No, not really. But they're not. There's no advantage to it unless you have a true 32-bit converter, which most interfaces do not at this point.
But, can I just reverse that question? Let's not make this a gigantic thing, but going the other way. Is it wrong to record in 16-bit? In my opinion, yes. Don't do that.
I would say so, right? No, I would definitely say so. 16-bit, doesn't have the dynamic range that I want to have when I'm mixing, right? So, and that does start to chop away at quality, right? So I would completely agree. Now, one of the things that was it Christopher was his name?
Christopher, yep.
He said, so, if you record at 32-bit floating point, you have to bounce at 32-bit floating point, right? Or Anders, if you record at 16-bit, do you have to bounce at 16-bit? Or if you record at 24-bit, do you have to bounce at 24-bit? And the answer to that question is no, right? How you record and how you bounce are usually two different things.
Can be, right?
Sure.
They are not usually for me. I usually am in 24, but they can be different things. This is internally in Pro Tools, so your interface isn't involved in this process. So if you really want to make sure that you have the highest possible dynamic range in your final bounce, go as high as you can, 32-bit float, even if you record it in 24.
Right, completely. Let me flip that question to you, Anders. This is such a good discussion. I love stuff like this. So if I recorded at 24-bit, which I normally do, and I think, Anders, you probably do as well. And let's say that my deliverable was 16-bit, non-negotiable, right? That's the format the customer says you've got to give. What happens?
Depending on my workflow. So let's say that I'm not sending this on to someone who masters this, but this is the final deliverable that I'm exporting out of my system. We usually add a dithering plugin on the last step of the master, or like after every other processing stage.
So when we talk about dynamic range in a DAW, we always measure down from 0, right? So -0 to -96 is the dynamic range of 16-bit audio. -0 to -144 is the dynamic range of 24-bit audio. So if I recorded at 24-bit and I bounced at 16-bit, I lose those softer sounds, which may be important, they may not. Anders is 100% right, 0% wrong, that when you bounce at a lower bit depth than your session, the best practice is to put on dither.
Yeah, but I mean, if I'm sending my mix on to a mastering engineer, I'll send him a 32-bit floating point.
Yep, I would agree with that.
And then he has the most resolution to work with.
So, guys, that was massively educational. I learned quite a few things that you could potentially record in 32-bit with an audio device, but actually it may only be sending in 24-bit data. That's good. I learned all about the basically the benefits of mixing in 32-bit, which is great. So that really does kind of answer my questions. That's great.
Woohoo!
I learned something new. And like I said before, I'll pass this knowledge off to other people pretending that I knew this from ages ago and that you didn't just tell me. Yeah. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That's awesome.
So guys, thank you for joining us. If you like this video, like and subscribe, obviously. If you want to learn more about what we do, ProToolsAnswers.com. You can learn about who we are, what we do, and how you can become part of the team. Anders does these great masterclasses on a monthly basis. So basically, there are a lot of ways that you can interface with us and you can learn more about what we're doing. And there are going to be more in the future where we've got big plans. So, guys, thank you very much. I'll wrap it up this time, and I'm going to say thank you to Anders.
Thank you, Andy.
And I'm going to say welcome and thank you to Alex.
Thank you.
And my name's Andy. We are Pro Tools Answers, and we're out.